Hello and welcome back. Tonight we're doing the One Piece Theory Iceberg. Quick note on how I'm using that word, because iceberg videos usually mean the deeper you go, the more disturbing it gets. That's not what this is. Down here, depth just means obscurity. How far into the fandom you'd have to have wandered before you heard the thing. Nothing tonight is scary. Some of it is quite silly. The one rule I'm holding myself to is this. Some of what I'm about to describe is confirmed in the manga. Some of it is stuff people made up on forums at 3 in the morning. I'll tell you which is which every single time, because a lot of the confusion around this series comes from people not bothering to. One more thing, I'm working from the manga, which is a fair way ahead of the anime, so there'll be elbaf material in here. Consider yourself warned. If you fancy sticking around for more of these, subscribing is free and helps a lot. That's the only time I'll mention it. Right, in we go. Let's start at the top of the iceberg where the water's still warm and you don't need to have read a single chapter of the manga to have opinions. And the first thing up here isn't really a theory at all. It's a joke that got so big it became load-bearing. The real treasure was the friends we made along the way. You know the line. Everyone knows the line. It's been a meme for well over a decade at this point, and it started as a joke at the expense of One Piece specifically, because the series is so relentlessly earnest about friendship that people assumed Oda would pull exactly that move at the finish. Then something odd happened. The joke stopped being a joke for a chunk of the fandom. People started arguing it sincerely. The One Piece isn't a physical thing, it's the bonds, it's the journey. The treasure was inside us the whole time. I'll be honest, I've never bought it, and I don't think the text supports it either. Roger's crew got to Laugh Tale and found something. They found an actual object, or a set of objects, in an actual place, and their reaction was to laugh, not to smile knowingly at each other about the power of friendship, to properly lose it. Rayleigh has talked about this more than once, and he's never once described it as a metaphor, which is what makes it interesting rather than annoying, because whatever's down there was funny. That's a genuinely strange thing to build a 20-something-year story toward. Most epic quests end in a sword, or a crown, or a big glowing rock. This one ends in a punchline, and Oda has been sitting on the setup for that punchline since 1997. I find that far more compelling than the friendship reading, and I'd be a bit disappointed if it turned out to be nothing but a warm feeling. Anyway, moving slightly along the surface, Zoro's eye. If you're not caught up, here's the situation. Zoro goes away for 2 years during the time skip. He trains under Mihawk, the strongest swordsman in the world. He comes back with a long vertical scar over his left eye, and the eye permanently closed. And Oda has said absolutely nothing about how it happened. Not in the manga, not really in the reader mail column, not anywhere that counts. So the fandom filled the gap, as it does. There are 3 main camps. Camp 1 says it's cosmetic. Zoro went away, got hard, came back looking hard. It's a visual shorthand for 2 years of getting battered by the best swordsman alive, and there is no story behind it beyond that. This is the boring answer, and it is genuinely possible, because Oda does sometimes just draw something cool. Camp 2 says Zoro did it to himself. Some kind of vow, some kind of handicap, in the tradition of a swordsman deliberately limiting himself to sharpen everything else. This one has legs because Zoro is exactly the sort of person who would do that and then never mention it to anyone. Camp 3 says Mihawk did it as a lesson, which I think is the weakest of the 3, honestly. Mihawk taking a student's eye out as a teaching method feels a bit much even for him, and their relationship in the flashbacks we've had reads more as reluctant mentorship than mutilation. There's a 4th idea floating around, that the eye isn't damaged at all, and Zoro is keeping something in reserve behind it. Some hidden power, some technique that requires opening it. And look, I would love that. It would be very stupid and very fun. I just don't think it's happening, and neither do most people who've thought about it seriously. What actually fascinates me is the silence. This scar has been on the character since 2011. Oda has had well over a decade of opportunities to explain it in a panel, in a flashback, in an offhand line. He hasn't. Either it's nothing and he's enjoying watching us squirm, or it's something he's holding for a very specific moment. Now let's talk a bit about Blackbeard, because he's got the busiest surface level theory in the whole series, and we'll be coming back to him properly later on. The Blackbeard pirate's flag has 3 skulls on it. 3 skulls, 8 bones. And Blackbeard is the only person in the story who has managed to hold more than one devil fruit power without dying, which everyone in universe agrees should be impossible. So people counted 3 skulls, and at the time of the theory taking off, he had 2 fruit powers, therefore 3 fruits. Therefore, he's already got a third one nobody's seen, or he's collecting toward a third. That's the surface version, and it's been kicking around since roughly the Marineford era. It's a pattern spotting theory rather than an evidence theory, which is why I've put it up here rather than further down. Down at the mechanism level, there's a much richer conversation about why his body can do it, and we'll get there. Up here, it's just people counting skulls, which is a perfectly enjoyable way to spend an afternoon. I do like that Blackbeard's design is stuffed with 3s though. 3 skulls, 3 sections in the beard, 3 scars he left on Shanks's face. Oda doesn't usually repeat a number that many times by accident. Since we're on the subject of things that refuse to die, let's talk about Vivi. Nefertari. Vivi travelled with the Straw Hats for a good long stretch of the early series. She was, functionally, a member of the crew. She was offered a permanent place and turned it down because she had a country to run, which was the correct and adult decision, and also devastating. And ever since, a substantial part of the fandom has been convinced she's coming back for good. I've watched this theory survive things that should have killed it. She's had her own plot lines. She's been swept up in the reverie chaos. She's been off page for enormous stretches, and every single time she shows up in a panel, the discourse restarts from zero, as though it's the first time anyone's thought of it. I think the honest read is that Vivi occupies a very specific emotional slot for a lot of readers. She's the one who got away. The crew has never had a member leave and stay gone, so people keep waiting for the correction. Whether Oda intends to give it to us is a separate question, and I genuinely don't know. I'd take it, I'm just not counting on it. Next one up here is Dragon, and this one's a bit different because it's less a theory than an enormous shrug that everyone has filled in differently. Monkey D. Dragon is Luffy's father and the leader of the Revolutionary Army, which means he is the single most wanted man in the world. He's been in the series since the first arc, standing in the rain in Logue Town, while lightning struck the execution platform, and a convenient gust of wind cleared the whole square. That's it. That's the evidence base. Wind and weather show up around him. He's never once been shown fighting. So obviously, the assumption for years has been that he's got some kind of wind or weather power, which fits. It's a clean read of the scenes we've got. But there's a competing idea I've always been fond of, which is that Dragon has nothing at all. No fruit, no supernatural anything. The weather in that scene was just weather, dramatically timed, because Oda draws dramatic weather constantly. And the reason Dragon's power has never been shown is that revealing he's very good at hitting people would be an anticlimax after 20-odd years of build-up, so it keeps getting deferred. I don't have a firm position on this one. I lean toward him having something, purely because the storm imagery is too consistent to be nothing. But I'd respect the other outcome enormously. Which brings me to Shanks, who is the last stop on this tier, and probably the most argued about character in the series. The question isn't what Shanks can do. The question is what Shanks is actually doing. Here's a man who gave up an arm to save a random child in a village nobody cares about, who then spent years apparently just sailing around drinking, who walked into Marineford, ended the single largest war in modern history by turning up and then left, who has a standing relationship with the 5 elders of all people, who talks to the world government like a peer rather than a criminal. None of that adds up to a normal pirate, and it hasn't for a very long time. So the theories multiplied. Shanks is a government agent. Shanks is playing both sides. Shanks is protecting Luffy from something. Shanks has a completely separate goal that has nothing to do with the treasure. Shanks isn't even one person, which is the strangest one, and which I'll come back to further down, because it connects to something the manga has since hinted at. What I'll give the fandom is that they were right to be suspicious. Everyone who said there's something structurally weird about Shanks' background has been vindicated, even if almost nobody guessed the specific shape of it, which is a nice illustration of how theory crafting actually works. You're rarely right about the answer. You can be very right about where the question is. And there's a whole category of theories built on exactly that instinct, which is where the fandom has its best hit rate by a mile. So since we're already talking about people whose backstories don't quite add up, let's go down a layer. Here's a thing I've noticed about One Piece theorizing over the years, and it's the reason this tier exists as its own layer. The fandom is bad at guessing power systems and very good at guessing who's related to who. The hit rate on lineage theories is so much higher than anything else that it can't be coincidence. And the reason is simple. One Piece is a story about inheritance. It says so constantly. The will of D, the will of the previous generation, a dead man's dream getting picked up by someone younger, a hat handed down through 3 owners. Oda has built a world where the most important thing about a person is often who came before them. So when readers go looking for hidden parents, they're reading the book the way it's written. Right? Let's do the big one first because it's confirmed now and it's still slightly hard to believe. Rox D. Zebek is Blackbeard's father. That's canon. Chapter 1154 showed Zebek's face for the first time and dropped that on everyone in the same breath. And the thing is, people called it. Not everyone, and not confidently, but the idea had been floating around for years off almost nothing. Blackbeard has a D in his name. Zebek has a D in his name. Blackbeard runs his crew out of Hachinosu, which was Zebek's old base. Blackbeard's whole approach to piracy, assemble the worst people you can find, point them at the world, is a direct copy of how the Rocks pirates operated. That's it. That's the whole evidence pile. Some name letters and a shared address. And it turned out to be right. I remember thinking it was a bit of a reach when I first heard it, which is a nice reminder that my instincts on this stuff are worth exactly nothing. Now the other one from that same stretch of the manga, and this one I think is the more shocking of the two, Vigeland Shamrock is Shank's twin brother. Confirmed, Shamrock turns up as a commander of the Knights of God, the Holy Knights, the world government's private muscle, and he has Shank's face. The Shanks is connected to the Celestial Dragons theory, had been around for ages, and it was built on one panel. During the God Valley material, there's a moment where a celestial dragon ship is shown, and there's a baby in a treasure chest, and Shanks is a baby found in a treasure chest. That's genuinely the whole thing. One visual rhyme, spotted by people reading far too carefully, and it opened onto a family name, a twin, and a whole institution. I find this one lovely because it shows what the good theorists actually do. They don't invent. They notice that Oda drew a chest twice. Now none of this would have been believable at all if not for what happened with Sanji. So let's talk about that, because it's the moment the fandom's appetite for lineage theories went properly feral. Sanji spent hundreds of chapters as the cook. He had a backstory. It was about starving on a rock with a man who cut his own leg off. It was complete, and it was moving, and nobody thought there was more to it. Then Oda revealed he was a Vinsmoke, third son of a family of genetically engineered killers, running a private military that arms half the underworld. His surname had been withheld for about 70 volumes. After that, everything was on the table. If Sanji could have a hidden noble bloodline, anyone could. And that's roughly when the modern era of parentage theorizing began. Speaking of which, let's do Weevil, who is the strangest open case in this category. Edward Weevil turned up claiming to be Whitebeard's biological son. His mother, Miss Buckin, insists on it loudly to anyone who'll listen. Weevil fights in a way that mirrors Whitebeard almost exactly. Has a similar build, similar Bicento, similar everything. The problem is that Whitebeard said repeatedly and clearly that he had no blood family. His sons were his crew. That was the entire point of him as a character. So the theory that's built up around this is that Weevil isn't Whitebeard's son in the ordinary sense. He's got Whitebeard's genetic material in him, put there deliberately, possibly before he was born, in the same way the Vinsmoke children were engineered before birth. And the load-bearing detail is that Buckin has specifically said Vegapunk could vouch for the lineage Vegapunk, who was part of the group that discovered the lineage factor in the first place, and who has spent his career doing exactly this sort of thing. I think that's probably right, or close to right. It threads the needle between Buckin telling the truth and Whitebeard telling the truth, which is the shape of problem Oda tends to enjoy. And here's a fun detail I like about Weevil. He's one of the very few characters whose entire narrative function so far has been to be an unresolved question. He shows up, hits something enormous, and leaves. He's a walking loose end. Oda doesn't usually leave those lying around this long unless he's got a use for them. Right, and now the one everybody wants and nobody has. Luffy's mother. We don't know who she is, we have never seen her. She has never been named, never been shown in silhouette, never been referenced by anyone as anything other than a logical necessity. This is genuinely unusual. Oda gives us mothers. Sometimes he gives us mothers just to take them away in flashback, which is a habit I have complicated feelings about, but he gives us them. Nami has Belmare, Sanji has Sora, Robin has Olvia. Ace's mother got an entire arc of significance around the way she died. Luffy has nothing. 20 plus years, and not a single frame. So the fandom went to work. The most persistent version is that Luffy's mother is Crocodile, which sounds absurd typed out like that, and I want to be fair to it, because it's not built on nothing. Crocodile has a mysterious past involving Ivankov, who runs an island of people who have changed their bodies. Ivankov knows a secret about Crocodile that Crocodile would kill to protect. Crocodile has an unexplained hatred of Whitebeard and an unexplained interest in the Straw Hats. Stack those up and you get a theory. I don't think it's a good theory. I think it takes a genuinely interesting piece of character mystery and flattens it into a gag. But I understand how it got here, and I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't laugh. The more sober position is that Luffy's mother has been withheld because the reveal matters, and the reveal matters because of who she's connected to rather than who she is. That's how this series usually works. Sanji's surname mattered because of Germa. Shanks's face mattered because of Figureland. Or, and I do think this is a live possibility, she's nobody. Dragon met somebody, they had a kid, she died or left, and the reason we've never seen her is that there's nothing to see. Oda's silence is not always a promise. One more from this layer, because it's the theory that made me realise how much of this is about pattern rather than evidence. Somebody, years ago, worked out that almost every major mystery character in the story slots into an existing family somewhere, and once you notice that, you can't stop. Every unexplained person becomes a hidden relative of someone. It becomes a lens you can't take off, which is fun, and also a trap, because the series does sometimes just introduce a person who is only themselves. Not everything is a bloodline. I've watched people spend a fortnight building a family tree for a background character who turned out to be a bloke with a hat. But talking a bit about the thing the fandom genuinely cannot crack, no matter how many family trees it draws, let's go down to where the actual machinery lives. Most people in this world don't know what a devil fruit is. That's the bit that gets skipped. These things have been in the story since the first chapter. Entire governments organise themselves around acquiring them, and not one character has ever been able to say where they come from, why they exist, or what the rules actually are underneath the rules everybody parrots. The closest we've got to an authority is Vegapunk, and Vegapunk is careful to flag that he's guessing. His stated position is that devil fruits are the embodiment of human wishes. If humans could fly, if humans could pass through walls, if humans could set themselves on fire. Somewhere back in history, the theory goes, those wishes crystallized into something, and the fruits are what's left of them. It's an elegant idea, and it explains a certain kind of fruit very neatly. The flight ones, the strength ones, the obviously aspirational ones. I don't fully believe it, and quite a few people don't either, for two reasons. The first is that Vegapunk describes it as a hypothesis. He isn't reporting a finding. He's the smartest man alive, doing his best with incomplete information, and the series has been quite deliberate about framing it that way. When the smartest character says, "I think," that's usually Oda leaving a door open. The second is that the wish framing gets uncomfortable fast when you look at the actual catalogue. Somebody wished to be a slow motion field. Somebody wished to turn people into toys and erase them from everyone's memory. Somebody wished to have a devil fruit power that transforms them into a horse hybrid and a full horse. There's a fruit that turns you into a wax dispenser. If these are humanity's aspirations, humanity has some odd priorities. So there's a competing idea that's been gathering momentum, and it clicked properly into place after Vegapunk's broadcast material. The Souls Theory. The short version is that a devil fruit isn't a wish, it's a container, something that didn't get to move on, held in a piece of fruit, waiting to be eaten so it can act in the world again. The evidence for this is circumstantial, but it stacks up in an interesting way. Fruits reappear somewhere in the world when their user dies, which is a strange property for a wish and a very natural one for something that persists independently of the body. Zoan fruits are explicitly described as having a will of their own. Awakened Zoans behave at times like there's a second party involved in the decision-making, and the whole series has a running interest in what survives a person. The will of D, the will of the previous generation, the idea that inherited intent is a physical force. If devil fruits are souls that couldn't pass on, then a lot of the series' vocabulary suddenly rhymes. I'm not going to tell you it's right. I will tell you it's the most satisfying, unconfirmed idea in the whole power system, and that it explains one particular thing better than the wish version does, which we'll get to in a minute. Now, while we're here, why does the sea reject them? Everybody knows the rule. Eat a fruit, lose the ability to swim, touch seawater, and you go limp. This has been true since the first arc and was only explained much later in universe. The standard read is that it's natural. The sea dislikes the unnatural. The fruits are unnatural. The sea takes its strength back. Poetic, tidy, unexamined. The more interesting read, and one I've grown quite fond of, is that it isn't natural at all. That the weakness is a countermeasure, something built in deliberately by whoever or whatever produced these things, so that no fruit user could ever be entirely untouchable. And here's what I like about that. It reframes the sea from setting into safeguard. Sea stone works the same way, and sea stone comes out of the ground in specific places, and nobody knows why it does what it does either. Two separate hard limits on the most powerful force in the world, both unexplained, both absolute. Either that's the universe being tidy or somebody built a lock. Anyway, let's do the Blackbeard mechanics properly, because I promised earlier, and it's the best argued corner of this whole area. The problem stated cleanly. Eating a second devil fruit kills you. This is stated flatly and repeatedly by characters who would know. Blackbeard has two. he is not dead. Marco, who has spent his life around this stuff, described the structure of Blackbeard's body as strange. Buggy has claimed the man has never slept in his life. When Luffy and Zoro first met him, they came away referring to him as they rather than he, which I always thought was a lovely bit of writing, whether or not it means anything. So, 3 main explanations. Explanation 1, the oldest, is the Cerberus theory. Blackbeard secretly ate a mythical Zoan that turned him into a 3-headed dog, giving him 3 separate soul slots, 1 per fruit, the 3 skulls on the flag, the 3 sections of beard, the 3 scars on Shanks. It's a beautiful theory, and I think the manga has largely closed the door on it. The Cerberus fruit appears to be accounted for elsewhere now, over in Elbaf, attached to Shamrock's sword, rather than to Blackbeard, which is a very Oda way to retire a fan theory, not by denying it, by handing the object to somebody else in passing. Explanation 2 is 3 souls without the dog, that Blackbeard's body is unusual enough to house more than 1 occupant, and the occupants are inherited, ancestors essentially riding along. Even without knowing anything about his father or any older Davy lineage sitting behind that, this has picked up a lot of support. If a soul can persist and act, and this family's whole deal is persistence, then Blackbeard being crowded makes a certain sense. Explanation 3, and this is the one I actually find most persuasive, is that it's not about souls at all, it's about bodies. And the evidence for this is Punk Hazard of all places. Remember what Law did there? He swapped everyone around, and in the chaos the series quietly established a rule it has never gone back on. When Sanji was in Nami's body, he could still use Haki. Haki went with the person. When Frankie was in Chopper's body, he could use Chopper's transformations. The devil fruit power stayed with the body. That's a hard mechanical distinction, dropped into a comedy arc, and it sat there unremarked for years. Haki belongs to the soul, fruit powers belong to the flesh, which means if you want to hold multiple fruits, you don't need multiple souls. You need multiple bodies. And there's a version of this where Blackbeard is not one person in a physical sense, not a haunted man, a merged one. Multiple bodies grown together into a single operating unit, each one capable of hosting its own power. It explains the strange structure Marco described. It explains why the number 3 keeps appearing around him. It explains the sleep thing, if you want it to, and it does all that without inventing a single new rule, because every rule it uses was established on Punk Hazard in front of everyone. I'm not certain. Nobody is. But that's the one I'd put money on. Now a shorter note on something adjacent, because it's a piece of the puzzle people forget. Devil fruit transfer. Somebody in CP9 back in the Aeneas Lobby era mentioned in passing that scientists on the Grand Line had already proven that eating 2 devil fruits makes your body explode. That was a throwaway line in a conversation about something else entirely, delivered by a minor character, and it's turned out to underpin an enormous amount of what's happened since. The artificial fruits, the way Blackbeard takes powers off the dead, Vegapunk's entire body of work. I think about that line a lot. It's one of the purest examples of how this series does foreshadowing. Not a portentous prophecy, a bloke explaining his job. And then there's a fun detail on the same theme, awakening. We've now seen 2 quite different flavours of it. Paramecia users reshaping the world around them, Zoan users becoming faster, tougher and noticeably less themselves. Those look like 2 different phenomena wearing the same word. Nobody in story has reconciled them. Nobody in the fandom has either, convincingly, which is roughly where the whole power system sits, honestly. A set of rules everyone follows, produced by a mechanism nobody understands, guarded by limits nobody can explain. Nobody has ever guessed one of those limits in advance, and I'll come back to why that is much further down. And that brings us to the 100 years nobody's allowed to talk about. Because it turns out quite a lot of what I've just said may have started there. There's a 100-year gap in this world's history, roughly 8 centuries back. And the world government has spent every day since making sure it stays a gap, not rewritten, erased. That distinction is the entire tier. So let me sit on it for a second. Rewriting history is what governments normally do. You lose a war, you publish a version where you won. Everyone shrugs and gets on with it. It's cheap and it works. The world government did not do that. They removed the century entirely and made the study of it a capital offence. And they've held that position across an entire planet, through generations of officials, without the policy ever softening. That's not embarrassment. Nobody puts that much effort into hiding a defeat. That's fear of something specific. The records survive anyway, because someone was clever. The poneglyphs, enormous blocks of a stone nobody can damage, carved in a script nobody can read, scattered across the world so that no single power could ever collect them all. Whoever placed them assumed the losing side would be hunted, assumed the language would die, and built for a reader who wouldn't exist for centuries. I've always found that quietly extraordinary. Somebody lost a war and, on the way down, wrote a letter to the future in a material that couldn't be burned. I don't think there's a better idea anywhere in this series, honestly, and it's introduced as set dressing in a desert ark. And the government's response tells you they take it seriously. O'Hara was an island of academics, not a military power, not a rival state. Scholars reading ancient stones, keeping their findings secret. The government sent a fleet and removed the island from the map, killed nearly everyone on it, and the official record calls it a justified action against a criminal organisation. They did that to a library. I want that to sit for a second because it's easy to read past. Not a fortress, not a rebel base, a university with a reading room, staffed by people whose most dangerous weapon was a filing system. That's the level of nervousness we're dealing with. Right, what actually happened? Here's the confirmed flaw, and then we'll get into the speculation. Confirmed. There were 20 kingdoms who allied together, defeated an enemy, and formed the world government out of that alliance. The descendants of those 20 families are the celestial dragons. Their enemy was a kingdom that lost so completely that its name is gone. Confirmed. There was a figure called Joy Boy, and there was a figure called Nika. And here's the thing that caught a lot of people out. It's never actually confirmed that they are two different people. I want to dwell on that because it's the single best example of the fandom being confidently, unanimously wrong. For years, the accepted position was that Joy Boy and Nika were the same entity under different names. It made sense, it tidied things up. Then Vegapunk's broadcast material came along and described Joy Boy as someone who lived in an advanced kingdom and could fight with a stretchy body, just like the legendary sun god Nika. Just like a comparison, which means two parties. The entire fandom had built on a foundation that turned out to be two foundations. I remember the week that landed. It was very funny and slightly humbling. Confirmed, and much more recently, Emu stated outright that Elbaf is D. That's chapter 1171, and it's one of those lines that's simultaneously enormous and completely opaque. Because what does that mean? Elbaf is a nation, not a person. It's the giant's homeland, thousands of people across generations. Saying an entire country is D reframes the letter from a family name into something closer to a category, an allegiance, a lineage in the broad sense rather than a surname. And the obvious inference is that the giants sided with the losing kingdom during that war, that they were part of whatever got erased, which is why the government has spent centuries treating Elbaf as a problem to be managed rather than a nation to be absorbed. Except there's a wrinkle, and it's the kind I enjoy. Elbaf's own mythology isn't really about Joy Boy at all. Their stories are about Nika, their gods, their legends, their war stories. Joy Boy barely comes up, which suggests the connection runs deeper and older than the war that formed the government. That whatever binds the giants to this is not a 100-year alliance, but something from much further back, and the war was simply the point where it came to a head. Now, the letter itself. What does D stand for? Nobody in universe will say. Characters who clearly know deflect. Characters who half know pass on fragments. And so the fandom has produced roughly a dozen answers, and I'll give you the ones that are actually worth hearing. The first is Dawn. This one's built on the fact that the current era is called the Great Pirate Era, and that Oda's very first volume is titled Romance Dawn, and that dawn imagery is threaded through the series, with the persistence of someone making a point. It's tidy. It fits Nika's whole solar business rather neatly. The second is Demon, and I like this one for a specific reason we'll get to. The third is Descendant, that D marks the surviving bloodline of the kingdom that lost. That it's not a name at all, it's a mark of survival. This is probably the most widely held position, and it does the most work with the least invention. The fourth is that it's a title rather than a name. A rank in some structure that no longer exists, carried forward by people who don't know what it originally meant, which would explain why so many D carriers seem entirely unaware they're part of anything. Now back to Demon, because there's a detail that makes it more interesting than it first sounds. Rocinante once told Law about the way celestial dragon children are raised. If you don't behave, the D will come and gobble you up. That's a nursery rhyme threat, a boogeyman used on toddlers in the holiest city in the world, which is a strange thing to be told about the most powerful people alive, that they frighten their children with the same story their ancestors won a war against. And that reframes everything, because it means the letter isn't a secret at the top. The people in charge know exactly what D is. They know well enough to frighten their children with it. What they've done is make sure that nobody outside that circle knows, so that the people actually carrying the letter walk around with no idea what they are. We saw this same idea surface again during the Elbaf material, where a celestial dragon's stated greatest fear turned out to be tied up in exactly this mythology. Whatever D is, they're raised on it, and they're raised to be afraid. There's a related line that goes, roughly, the D will always bring another storm, which is a phrase I find flat out unsettling in a pleasant way, because it implies recurrence. Not one enemy, a weather pattern, something that keeps happening no matter how thoroughly you erase it. And then there's the smiling. This is the observation that started it all, really. Going right back to the early series, people carrying the letter D tend to die smiling. Roger on the scaffold, Ace at Marineford. It happens often enough that characters in story have commented on it as a known phenomenon. Two readings. One, it's thematic. These are people who die having done what they wanted. And the smile is the story telling you they won on their own terms. Two, and this is the odd one, it's mechanical. Something about what they are produces that response regardless of circumstance. I lean thematic, personally, but I'll admit the mechanical reading is more fun, and this series has form for taking something that looked like a motif and revealing it was a system all along. Here's the thing that always fascinated me about this whole tier though, the government won. Completely, permanently, a very long time ago. They hold every institution, every army, every scrap of official history, and they are still frightened. Of a letter, of a legend about a god who makes people laugh, of a nation of giants who mostly want to be left alone. That's not the behaviour of a winner. That's the behaviour of someone who knows the fight isn't over, and who's been waiting ever since for the other side to remember who they are. Now let's talk about the actual shape of the world, because a fair bit of it doesn't add up either. Picture the map for a second. There's a mountain range that runs all the way around the planet, pole to pole, in a single unbroken line. It's called the Red Line. Crossing a second belt of ocean at right angles is the Grand Line, and where the two meet, you get the Holy City on top and the Fishman District underneath. Now that's a very tidy arrangement, suspiciously tidy, Planets don't usually come with a perfect ring of mountain around the equator of the vertical axis and a current running exactly perpendicular to it. That's not geology, that's architecture. Which is the theory? The red line is not a natural feature. Somebody put it there. The version I find most convincing doesn't even require a builder. It requires a survivor. If the world was once mostly land and something happened to raise the seas dramatically, then what you'd have left is the highest ground, a ridge, and everything we call an island would be a mountaintop. And there's a fair bit that supports the drowning reading. Sunken ruins turn up constantly. Whole cities under the water of a scale and sophistication that nobody currently alive can match. There's a city down there with a golden bell that spent centuries at the bottom of the sea before anyone went looking, shipwrecks stacked in layers. Then there's the technology problem. There are machines in this world that predate the current era and outperform everything modern. There's a robot on Egghead Island that Vegapunk, the smartest person alive, the man who has spent his career reverse engineering the impossible, could not fully understand. He could not keep it running. He could not explain it. That's a pointed detail. That's a story telling you the past was more advanced than the present. Put the pieces together and you get the post-apocalyptic reading. Not a fantasy world, a ruined one. A civilization that had all this, lost a war or suffered a catastrophe or both, went under the water and left the survivors on the peaks to start again, with worse tools and no memory. I want to give the counter-argument a fair go, because I think it's stronger than people allow. Oda draws sunken cities because sunken cities are cool. He draws ancient robots because ancient robots are cool. This is a pirate adventure with a fondness for ruins, and reading a buried science fiction premise into it might be readers doing the work the text isn't doing. I still lean toward the drowned world, but I hold it loosely, and I'd think better of the series if it turned out to be simpler than that. Now, since we're talking about things that shouldn't be where they are. The moon. This is my favourite thing in One Piece, and I'm going to be indulgent about it. There's a cover story, one of those little side comics that run in the corner of the page, while the main plot happens elsewhere. Following Enel after he gets beaten in Skypiea, and Enel goes to the moon, and on the moon he finds the ruins of a city. Not rocks, a city, with murals, and the murals show people with wings leaving the moon and coming down to the blue sea, because their home had run out of resources. That's the entire origin of the Sky People, delivered in a side comic that a huge number of readers skipped because it looked like filler, and it lands. The Shandia, the Birkans, the winged people of Skypiea, they aren't a fantasy race Oda invented for one arc. They're the descendants of migrants. Their ancestors came down from a dying colony and settled somewhere that had air. I love this partly because of what it does to the scale of the story. This is a series that spent its first 100 chapters in a bar fight, and it turns out there's a lunar civilization in the background the whole time, sitting patiently in the corner of a page. There's a further layer that people argue about, which is whether the moon people and the ancient kingdom are connected, whether the advanced civilization that lost the war and the civilization that left the moon are the same story from two angles. There's no confirmation of that, but the technology on the moon and the technology in the ruins have a family resemblance, and Oda doesn't usually design two things the same way, by accident. Right. Zunesha. There's an elephant the size of a country walking through the ocean with an island on its back, and it has been walking for 800 years. Confirmed from the elephant's own mouth, it committed a crime, and it was told to keep walking, and it has been keeping walking ever since. It doesn't know if the sentence has an end. It doesn't seem to know if the person who passed it is still alive, and the number is the number. That puts the sentencing squarely in the century that got deleted. So the theory is straightforward and quite sad. Zunesha was on the losing side. Zunesha did something during that war, carried someone, hid something, refused an order, and whoever won handed down a punishment that outlasted everyone who remembered issuing it. What gets me about it is the obedience. Zunesha is functionally invulnerable. It has a limb that can level a fleet. Nothing on the planet can compel it to do anything, and it keeps walking because it was told to, and nobody has ever come to say stop. That's a properly haunting bit of world building, and Oda plays it almost entirely straight, which makes it worse, or better. I'm not sure. So, the ancient weapons, briefly, because I think the conventional framing of them is wrong. 3 of them: Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus. The stated capability is that each could destroy the world, and the government wants all 3 badly enough to have organised centuries of policy around them. Pluton is a warship. That one's clean. There are blueprints. They were kept in Water 7, and the thing is apparently sitting under Wano. Poseidon is a person. Shirahoshi, the mermaid princess, who can call the Sea Kings, and I want to flag how strange that is as a category. One of the 3 world-ending superweapons is a frightened teenager who cries a lot and doesn't want to hurt anyone. The weapon is a relationship she can ask, and things the size of mountains come when she asks, which suggests Uranus might not be a thing either. If one of the 3 is a ship and one of the 3 is a girl, then weapon is doing a lot of work as a word. It might be a capability, it might be a place, it might be something that only counts as a weapon if you're the sort of person who runs a world government. And that reframes the whole hunt. The government isn't collecting bombs. They're collecting whatever the previous civilization could do that they can't. One last thing on this tier, and it connects back to the drowning. Vegapunk's broadcast included a claim about the sea level rising. Not a prophecy, a measurement. He'd been tracking it, and his conclusion was that the water is coming up and the world will eventually go under. So if the world drowned once already, and it's drowning again, then this isn't a story about an apocalypse. It's a story about a cycle, and the thing everyone's sailing toward at the end of the Grand Line might not be treasure so much as the last people's notes on what to do when it happens. Which honestly would explain why the crew that found it laughed. Sometimes the only sane response to inheriting a problem that big is to find it funny. Since we're already on the subject of things people worship, let's go down to the gods. In 2002, in an arc, a lot of people found a bit of a slog. Oda mentioned in passing that the Shandia prayed to 4 gods: the sun god, the rain god, the forest god, the land god. 4 names, 1 line, no follow-up. The 20-odd years that sat there as scenery. Local colour for a sky island. Nobody built anything on it because there was nothing to build. Then Luffy's fruit turned out to be the sun god Nika, and every single person who'd read Skypiea sat up at once. Because if one of the 4 is real, the other 3 are a shopping list, and Oda has started ticking them off. During the Elbaf material, one of the holy knights, a man raised in the holiest city on the planet, surrounded by every advantage the world can offer, has his greatest fear pulled out of him, and it's the rain god. Zaza, named out loud in chapter 1182. 24 years between the setup and the payoff. I don't think I have the patience to plan a shopping trip that far ahead. Right, Nika thoroughly, because he's the centre of the whole tier. What's confirmed? There is a mythical Zoan fruit that grants Nika's abilities. During the Erased Century, it was held by Joy Boy. It's now held by Luffy. The government renamed it to something boring specifically to hide what it was, and they were so thorough about it that even the emperors of the sea had no idea. They spent centuries chasing that fruit. What's contested is what Nika actually was. Here's what makes it fun. The accounts don't agree. Some traditions call him the god of liberation, because he turns up and things stop being the way they were. Some call him the god of destruction, because when he turns up, an awful lot of things get destroyed. Some call him the god of justice. Those aren't contradictions. They're eyewitness accounts from different positions in the room. Ask a slave what happened when the walls came down, and you get liberation. Ask the person who owned the walls, and you get destruction. Ask someone standing at a distance, and you get justice, which is in earnest, clever piece of writing, because it means the god's nature depends entirely on where you are standing, and that is also true of every revolution in the real world. The Elbaf material added something I didn't see coming though. Nika was a giant. Confirmed, chapter 1175. Their mythology has him fighting the Elbaf god of war, a figure with the power to become Nidhogg, with an ice squirrel alongside him, which is a detail I think about more than is reasonable. And the Nika in those stories is drawn at giant scale. And that does something rather satisfying to a very old mystery. There's an enormous straw hat sitting in a treasure room under the holy city. Enormous, far too big for a person. It's been there since just before we first laid eyes on the empty throne, and for years the only sensible guess was that it belonged to someone very large. If Nika was a giant, then the hat has an owner, and the government has been keeping a dead god's hat in a vault ever since, which tells you something about how they think about him. On to the Norse business, because once you notice it, you can't stop. Nidhogg is the serpent gnawing at the roots of the world tree. Elbaf has a world tree. The prince is called Loki. There's a Ragnir. The naming scheme is not subtle, and it's not meant to be. Oda has been signposting Elbaf as the Norse ark since Little Garden, where two giants named Dori and Brogi told a story about a serpent soaked in blood that nothing could pierce. That was 1999. The payoff is arriving now. I find that sort of thing enormously comforting, actually. Somebody was keeping notes. So, Imu. For years, Imu was a silhouette on a throne. Not a character, a shape. The five elders, the most powerful individuals in the visible world, bowing to a shadow. The face reveal came in chapter 1179, and Imu came down to Elbaf personally, which is the part that matters more than the face. Because up until that point, Imu had never done anything directly. A whole history of ruling through other people. And then a situation arose that Imu decided could not be delegated. Here's the detail everyone latched onto, and rightly. Imu started bleeding almost immediately on arrival. Coughing blood. Visibly limited, which invites a theory I think is very likely correct. Imu has been damaged since the war, that whatever happened against Joy Boy left a wound that never closed, and that's the actual reason for the throne, the shadow, the delegation, the whole long habit of ruling from behind a curtain. Not mystique, convalescence, and that recontextualizes the entire world government, an institution built around protecting one very old, very powerful, very badly injured person from ever having to fight again. There's a memory that surfaces in the same stretch, and this one's lovely. Imu recalling time spent with Joy Boy, not fighting him, with him. The framing suggests they knew each other, and knew each other well enough that the memory is worth having, which changes the shape of the whole conflict. This isn't a god and a monster. It's two people who were in the same room once, and one of them won, and the winner has spent every year since making sure nobody ever finds out the other one existed. All right, the identity theories, and I'll be brief because most of them are unfalsifiable. The most popular for a long time was that Imu is Lily, Nefertari D. Lily, the Queen of Alabaster, who was one of the 20 founders, and who vanished rather than take her seat in the Holy City. The theory had good bones, the silhouette's hair looked right, the timing worked, and the idea of the one founder who walked away being the one who ended up on top is deliciously ironic. Then Imu turned out to have the family name Nerona, which is not a name anyone had heard, and the whole thing got a lot more complicated. It's not dead, it's just been mugged. And that raises the empty throne, which I think is the single best piece of set design in the series. There's a room in the Holy City with a throne in it, and the throne is empty, and the official position is that it's a symbol. Nobody rules. The 20 kingdoms govern jointly. The empty chair represents the absence of a king, except somebody sits in it. That's the joke, and it's a bleak one. The symbol of no one rules here is a literal description that is also a lie, and it's been hiding a monarch in plain sight for the whole of recorded history by being too obvious to check. A couple more quickly, because this tier has been growing fast. Chapter 1. 1189 gave us a glimpse of a sea god, which, if you're keeping score against that Skypiea list, is a 5th entry rather than one of the 4, and I have no idea what to do with that yet. Neither does anyone else. It's about 2 weeks old at time of writing. And there's the Harley, which is Elbaf's prophetic tradition, a foretelling of events in which Nika appears at a time of great change. That's the frame the giants have been operating in this whole time. They're not surprised that a sun god turned up. They've been expecting one. They just weren't expecting him to be a 19-year-old who eats like a bin. What strikes me I keep coming back to on this tier, every god in this story is a real person who did real things remembered badly by people who weren't there. Enel called himself a god and was a man with a fruit. Nika is a legend and is also a fruit somebody's currently wearing. Emu is worshipped by an entire civilization and is a wounded old thing hiding behind a chair. Nobody in One Piece is divine. They're just old, and the record is bad, and time turns a very strong person into a story. And what's more, a fun detail about how all of this gets built in the first place, because the man assembling it has become a subject of theory himself. There's a whole category of theory down here that isn't about the world at all. It's about the man drawing it. And the central question, the one the fandom has been having in a loop for about 15 years, is this: did Oda plan all of it, or is he very good at making it look that way afterwards? I'll give you the honest answer up front, and then we can enjoy the arguments. The honest answer is somewhere in the middle, and it's a bit boring, which is exactly why nobody wants to say it out loud. Let's do the case for planning first, because it's actually impressive. The straw hat. Shanks gives it to Luffy in Chapter 1. It's a nice moment about a promise. Then, much later, we learn Shanks got it from Roger. Then we learn there's an enormous version of it in a vault under the Holy City. A prop from the opening scene of a pirate cartoon turned out to be a religious artifact, and the line connecting those two things is drawn cleanly enough that it doesn't creak. The serpent story from Little Garden that I mentioned earlier, waiting 25 years for the Norse Ark to arrive and make it mean something. The Skypiea gods, sitting in a single line of dialogue for 2 decades. The devil fruit transfer line from an ordinary CP9 conversation, quietly holding up half the modern power system. The poneglyph in Alabaster that people assumed was a one-off plot device, and which turned out to be part of a global network with a specific reading order. That's not luck. Some of that is unambiguously plan. Now, the case for improvisation, which people are weirdly reluctant to make. Certain characters are clearly designed later and reverse-fitted. Certain plot threads change shape in ways that suggest a rethink rather than a reveal. The stated length of the series has moved repeatedly. Oda has given end dates and then sailed past them with the calm of a man who has done this before. There was a 5-year plan, and then it wasn't 5 years, and then there was another one. And crucially, the series has grown. Arcs got longer. The cast expanded past the point where anyone could have drawn up a roster in advance. That's not a criticism, it's just what happens when a weekly serial runs for nearly 30 years, and the author keeps having ideas. So the truthful position, I think, is that Oda planned the skeleton and improvises the flesh. The big beats, the century, the letter, the treasure, the ending, those have been fixed for a very long time. What happens between them gets built as he goes, and he's exceptionally good at reaching back into old material and giving it a new job, which is a real skill, and arguably a rarer one than pure planning. Anyone can write an outline. Making chapter 50 pay off in chapter 1100 requires you to have been paying attention to yourself for a quarter of a century. Anyway, a related question that produces genuine arguments. How much authority does the reader mail column have? There's a section in the volumes where readers send in questions and Oda answers them. And he answers a lot of them as jokes. Somebody asks what a character's birthday is and gets a pun. Somebody asks something enormous about the plot and gets a drawing of a duck. But sandwiched between the ducks, he sometimes says something real. Actual mechanics, actual backstory, information that has never appeared in the manga and never will. So there's a permanent low-level dispute about whether that counts. My view, for what it's worth, is that it counts until it's contradicted, and you have to develop an ear for when he's being serious. He signals it, usually, by dropping the bit. The cover stories are the other channel, and they're not disputed at all. They're just missed. Those little side comics running in the corner of the page have carried entire plot lines. The moon material lives there. Enormous amounts of what happened to the Baroque Works crew lives there. It's a genuine second narrative running alongside the first, and skipping it means you've read a different book to everyone else. Which brings me to the jump festa business, and this is where the line between author statement and fan theory gets interestingly blurry. At the end of 2025, Oda put out a message about what 2026 was going to look like, and he said, in as many words, that we're heading to the island only the Pirate King ever reached, and that the man marked by flames would appear. So that's an author telling you something. That's not a theory, but watch what happens to it in the wild. Within a day, we're heading to that island became 100 competing readings of what heading to means. Does that mean arriving? Does that mean setting course? Which island? Given there's a signpost island before the final one. And the man marked by flames spawned an entire genre of speculation about who that could possibly be, most of it based on characters we've barely seen. That's the gap I find fascinating. An author's tease is not information, it's a shape, and the fandom fills the shape with itself. There's also a slightly sadder theory-adjacent thing in this tier, which is the ending date discourse. Oda has said the ending is coming for a long time. Different numbers at different points, and every time one of those dates goes past, a certain part of the internet treats it as a broken promise. I've never had much time for that, honestly. The man has been drawing a weekly comic since 1997. He has had health problems. He takes more breaks now than he used to, and the breaks are the reason the work is still good. Anyone doing that job for that long and still landing payoffs planted in the last century is doing fine by me. And there's a fun detail on the breaks specifically. A chunk of them aren't his at all. The magazine itself shuts down for national holidays, so everything in it stops. People blame Oda for weeks he had no say in. He is, in that sense, the most complained about man in publishing for crimes committed by a calendar. One more in this tier, and it's the one I find truly charming. There's a theory about Oda's process, that he works out the emotional beat of a scene first and the plot mechanics second, and that this is why the mechanics occasionally have to be bent to fit. You can see it if you look. The moments that land hardest in this series are almost never the ones with the cleanest logic. They're the ones where someone cries in the rain, or a ship gets a funeral, or a man raises a drink to a friend he's about to lose. Whether that's true, I have no idea. But it matches what's on the page, and it explains a lot about why people forgive this series things they'd never forgive elsewhere. Anyway, let's talk about how the whole thing might actually finish, because that's its own layer entirely. Every long story eventually generates a fandom industry devoted to guessing its last page, and this one's been running that industry for well over a decade. What's different now is that the guesses have got specific, because the series has entered its final stretch and a lot of the fog has cleared. Let's start with the fight everyone assumes is coming. Luffy against Blackbeard. The symmetry is almost too neat. Both carry the letter, both were shaped by the same stretch of ocean, both have a claim on a dead man's legacy. One inherited Roger's hat, the other took Rox's former base. Blackbeard has spent the entire series shadowing Luffy from a half step behind, showing up at the edge of arcs, taking things Luffy cared about. And they want the same object. Structurally, that's the fight. Whatever else happens, those two need to be in a room at the end. The complication is Immu, who is very obviously the final antagonist in the political sense, so you've got two endings competing for the same slot, which is why the popular reading has settled on a sequence rather than a single climax. The war against the government happens, and then the treasure happens, and Blackbeard is somewhere in the middle of both being a nuisance. I'd add that Blackbeard is the only major character whose motivation is straightforwardly greed, in a story where everyone else wants freedom or history or revenge. That makes him the right final opponent for Luffy specifically, because Luffy's whole thing is that he doesn't actually want the treasure very much. He wants to be the person who got it. Putting him against someone who wants only the object is a clean thematic finish. On to the flood. I flagged the rising sea earlier, so I won't go over the mechanics again. What matters here is what people think it means for the ending. The most common version is that the world goes under, and the ending is about survival rather than victory. The Straw Hats reach the last island, learn what actually happened, and the knowledge turns out to be a set of instructions. That'd make the treasure functional rather than symbolic, which I think would be a bold choice and slightly at odds with the laughing. The version I prefer is smaller. The red line comes down. Not the world, just the wall. You break the ring, the oceans join up, the four seas become one sea, and the political geography that has held this civilization in place since the beginning simply stops existing. No conquest required. The government doesn't get overthrown, it gets made irrelevant by a change in the map. That would fit the series' idea of freedom rather well. Nobody wins the world. The fences come down, and people sort themselves out. Right, the treasure itself, which is the question underneath all of the others. So here is what we actually know. It's a physical thing or a set of things. It's on the last island. Roger's crew found it and laughed hard enough that Rayleigh still talks about the laughing rather than the object. And Roger said in a line that gets quoted constantly that he'd arrived too early. That last bit is the most useful clue in the whole series, and it's underused. Too early for what? Not too early to find it, he found it. Too early to do something with it, which means the treasure requires a condition to be met, and the condition wasn't met in Roger's time, and might be met in Luffy's. The two readings I find worth holding are these. One, it's the truth. The complete history, the thing the government erased, sitting there in a form anyone could read. And it's funny because of how petty the reason for the whole cover-up turns out to be. That would fit the laughing perfectly, and it'd fit a series where the villains keep turning out to be smaller than their reputations. 2, and this is the one I'd bet on, it's both. An object and a joke. Something enormous with something absurd attached to it, because that's the register this series has always operated in. Oda does not do pure solemnity. Every honestly huge moment in this story has something ridiculous in the frame. There's a third possibility that I keep circling, which is that the treasure is people. Not in the friendship meme sense, literally. Something or someone preserved on that island. Given what we've learned about how long certain characters have been alive, and given the series' interest in things that persist past their proper time, finding a person down there would not be out of character for the material. And the ending nobody wants to talk about. Does Luffy die? There's a persistent theory that he does. That becoming Pirate King is the last thing he does, and the cost of doing it is everything. The evidence people cite is thin. It's mostly the pattern of D-carriers dying at moments of triumph, which we covered. I don't buy it, and not just because I don't want it. It'd be the wrong ending for this specific story. This is a series about a man who wanted to be free, and killing him at the moment he achieves it turns freedom into a trap. Oda has written a lot of tragedy, but he's never once suggested that wanting things is a mistake. What I do think is likely is that the hat moves on. It's had 3 owners we know of, and it may be older than all of them. A story this invested in inheritance almost has to end with the object going to someone else. And then there's the last page speculation, which is my favourite kind because it's completely unfalsifiable and entirely harmless. The most popular guess is that the final panel mirrors the first. Chapter 1 opens with Roger on the scaffold, telling the world where he left it. So the ending would show Luffy in some equivalent position, saying something equivalent, and the whole thing closes into a loop. Another guess, which I like more, is that it ends on a meal. This series has always been most itself when everyone sat down, eating too much and shouting. Finishing there rather than on a battlefield would be a very Oda decision. And a third, which somebody suggested years ago, and I've never been able to shake, is that the last page is a new kid on a beach hearing the story secondhand and deciding to go. Because that's how the whole thing started for Luffy. And because a story about inherited will that doesn't end with someone inheriting it would be a strange story indeed. What I'll say about all of this. Every one of these guesses is going to look either prophetic or ridiculous within a couple of years, and there's no way to know which in advance. That's not a problem. That's the good bit. There's a very narrow window where a story is nearly finished and not finished, and inside that window, everyone gets to be right. We're in it now. It'll close soon. And then there's the stuff the fandom made up about itself, which is where I want to end up. Right, we're near the bottom. And the bottom is not dark. The bottom is stories the fandom tells about itself, which are often more interesting than the ones in the manga. Let's start with the big one, and I want to handle this carefully, because it's a nice story, and it isn't true. You may have heard that Oda told the ending of One Piece to a dying child. The version that circulates goes like this. A young fan, terminally ill, made a wish through a charity. The wish was to know how it ends. And Oda travelled to meet the child and told them the ending in private. And that child is the only person outside the process who knows. It's fabricated. There's no source under it. It has been circulating for well over a decade, and every version traces back to another version. And I think it's worth spending a minute on, because it's a perfect specimen of how fandom folklore forms. Look at what the story does. It confirms that the ending exists and is fixed, which is what everyone wants to believe. It makes the author kind, which is easy to believe because he seems it. It's emotionally satisfying enough that checking it feels rude. And it's unfalsifiable. You can't disprove a private conversation. That's a story engineered, without anyone engineering it, to survive. It reproduces because it's pleasant, not because it's accurate. I bring it up not to be sour about it. The impulse behind it is entirely lovely. People wanted their favourite author to be a good man in a specific, provable way, so they built him a proof. It just isn't evidence of anything, and if you've been carrying it around as a fact, now you know. Next in the same family, and this one's more of a genre than a single story. The fake leak. Every couple of years, a list appears. It's always presented as insider information, always framed as the real plan, and it always contains the same broad furniture. Zoro gets a sword made of sea stone, so he can cut through haki. Sanji gets restored to himself, somewhere in the Kamabaka kingdom. Usopp gets a secret Logia fruit and a bow. Blackbeard absorbs every fruit power in the world at the end. I've seen that list, or a version of it, more times than I can count. New coat of paint, same skeleton. And what gives it away once you've read a few is that fake leaks are always wish fulfillment for the person writing them. They give the underused characters upgrades. They resolve the frustrations the fandom has been complaining about that month. They never contain anything really strange, because the person inventing them can only invent what they already want. Real developments in this series are never like that. Real developments are things like the sun god was a giant, or an elephant is serving a sentence. Nobody's wish list produces those. There's a decent rule of thumb in there actually. If a leak feels satisfying, it's fake. Oda's material tends to feel slightly wrong for a day or two before it feels brilliant. Right, on to something more cheerful. Panda Man. For the uninitiated, Panda Man is a character who does exist. He's a background gag, a man in a panda-ish outfit that Oda hides in crowd scenes, has done since near the beginning, and continues to do. He turns up in fight audiences, in wanted poster boards, in rubble, and a genuine sub-hobby has grown up around finding him. People comb chapters, people maintain records. There are readers who have spotted him in places that are frankly questionable. And that's where this gets interesting, because Pandaman trained a generation of readers to look at the corners of the page. And once you're in the habit of scanning backgrounds for a joke, you start finding things that aren't jokes. The poneglyph nobody was supposed to notice, the face in the crowd that turns out to matter 200 chapters later. The gag built the skill. I don't think that was on purpose, but the effect is real. Oda's readers examine his art at a level most comic readers never bother with, and a hidden panda is partly responsible. The flip side is the false positive, which is its own long tradition. People finding patterns that aren't there. The numerology stuff particularly gets away from folk quite badly. There's a genuine layer of number-based wordplay in this series, because Japanese lends itself to it and Oda enjoys it. And that means every number in every panel is a potential clue, which means every number in every panel gets treated as one. I once watched a very thorough person build a case on a page number. Not a number in the art, the page number, printed by the publisher. That's the hazard of a series that rewards close reading. Sometimes the reward function is broken, and you're just reading closely at nothing. Anyway, a related folklore item that I've always enjoyed. The idea that Oda reads the theories. This one has a bit more going for it than the others, because it would be very strange if he didn't. He's aware of his fandom. He's referenced fan reactions before. Where it gets speculative is the claim that he changes things in response. That a theory getting too popular means it gets discarded, or subverted, or handed to a different character. I don't think that's how it works, and I say that mostly because the timelines don't allow it. Weekly manga is drawn well in advance. The lead time is real. By the time a theory has gone completely viral, the chapters that would need to change are already drawn. What I do think happens, and this is much subtler, is that a very popular theory changes how a reveal lands, even when the reveal was always the plan. If everyone's already guessed it, the chapter reads as confirmation rather than surprise. That's not Oda responding. That's the audience arriving early and then complaining the party was predictable. One more, and it's my favourite bit of fandom self-mythology. The rereaders. There's a substantial group of people who have read this entire series multiple times, and there's a running claim that you cannot fully understand it on a first pass. That the foreshadowing is dense enough that a first read is essentially a rough draft of the experience. Is that true? Partly. There's certainly material that only registers, in hindsight, the chest, the serpent, the four gods, the transfer line. But I've also seen it used as a bit of a shield. Any criticism gets met with, "You'd understand on a reread," which isn't an argument, it's a homework assignment. I'd say this: the series does reward rereading more than almost anything else of its size. It also has pacing problems in places, and you're allowed to say so. Both of those can be true, and the fandom's habit of treating the first as a defense against the second is one of its less charming features. Anyway, that's the folklore. Stories about a kind author, lists of things people wanted, a panda, and a community that reads very hard. And speaking of things people wanted, let's finish with the theories that didn't make it, and the ones that did. Theories die in this fandom constantly, and hardly anyone marks the occasion. So let's do a few obituaries, because retired theories are historical artifacts, and I think they deserve better than being quietly deleted from people's memories. First, the Cerberus fruit. We touched on the mechanics earlier, so I won't relitigate it. The point here is the manner of death. That theory was load-bearing for years. It had a diagram. People had drawn the 3 heads, and it didn't get disproved with a statement. It got disproved by the object turning up somewhere else entirely, attached to a sword belonging to a man nobody had heard of 18 months ago. There's no announcement. There's no scene where a character says, "And by the way, that thing you all thought." The fruit just appears in someone else's hands, and the theory quietly stops being possible. I find that a slightly brutal way to go, and also entirely fair. Nobody owes the audience a funeral. Second, and this is the biggest one, Joy Boy being Nika. Already covered the mechanics of that reveal. What I want to note here is the scale of the casualties. That single clarification took out a whole shelf of downstream theories at once. Everything built on the assumption that the two were one figure had to be rebuilt from the foundation, and a lot of it never was. People just quietly stopped bringing up their old positions and started arguing new ones, as though the old ones had never happened. That's very human and very funny to watch in real time. Third, Sarbo's death, which is less a theory that died than a theory that refused to. For a long stretch of the series, Sarbo was dead. A tragic backstory element. The third brother, killed as a child, present only in flashback, and a persistent minority never accepted it, on the grounds that we saw a burning boat rather than a body, which in a story like this is a plainly good instinct. They were right, and they were right for years while being told they were sentimental. The reason I file this under Graveyard rather than Triumph is what happened next, because the same reasoning got applied to every death in the series afterwards. No body, no death. And that turned into an enormous engine of disappointment, because sometimes Oda does just kill people, and the no body, no death rule has produced far more wrong predictions than right ones. One correct call generalized into a bad law. Fourth, and this one's more of a mass grave, the pre-time skip power theories. There was a whole ecosystem of speculation before the 2-year gap about how the crew would grow stronger, and almost none of it survived contact with Haki, because Haki, as a system, was barely present in the early series. There were hints in retrospect, but nobody was building on them because there was nothing to build on. So the fandom spent years theorizing about power progression in a story whose actual power progression hadn't been introduced yet. Every one of those theories is now unreadable. And I mean that literally. If you go and dig up forum threads from that era, they're written in a vocabulary that no longer maps onto anything. People arguing about relative strength using categories that stopped existing. Elaborate rankings built on the assumption that devil fruit type was the main variable, which turned out to be roughly as useful as ranking boxes by shoe size. There's one that still makes me laugh. There was a widely held position that Zoro's ceiling was limited because he had no fruit, and that he'd eventually need one to stay relevant against the top tier. That was not a fringe view. That was the sensible, moderate, well-argued position held by people who had read the series carefully. Then Haki arrived, and the entire premise inverted. Not having a fruit stopped being a handicap. In some matchups, it became an advantage. Nobody could have called that. There was nothing on the page to call it from. Which is why I've got a lot of sympathy for the people who got it wrong, and none at all for the ones who now claim they saw it coming. That's a useful bit of humility, I think. You cannot predict a rule you have never seen. Fifth, the Straw Hat crew size theories, which are a lovely little example of overfitting. For years, people were certain about how many members the crew would end up with. There were numerological arguments. There were arguments from ship design. The Sunny has a certain number of berths, therefore. There were arguments from the opening theme. And people had specific candidates lined up. Vivi, obviously. A shipwright, a musician, a doctor, all of which came true and encouraged everyone enormously. Then various post-time skip candidates, most of whom didn't join. The berth counting one is my favourite failure because it's such a confident piece of reasoning from such a thin premise. Somebody drew a ship. That's it. That's the whole basis. Sixth and last for the graveyard. Every theory that assumed a character's design meant something. This one never dies as a category, only as individual instances. Someone has an unusual hat, therefore they're connected to a faction with hats. Someone has a scar in a shape, therefore. Someone's colour scheme matches another character's, therefore. Occasionally, this works because Oda does encode things visually. Mostly it doesn't, because he also just likes drawing unusual hats. The odd part I want to say about the graveyard generally, though, and then we'll move to the happier list. Being wrong about this stuff costs nothing. Nobody is harmed by having believed for 6 years that Blackbeard was part dog. The activity is the point. A theory that turns out to be wrong still did its job, which was to make you read more carefully and argue with strangers about a comic. The only failure mode worth avoiding is the one where somebody presents speculation as fact, and other people repeat it. Which brings us neatly to the opposite pile. Right, the last proper stop, and this is the pile I enjoy most because it's the theories that got mocked and then turned out to be correct. I want to be careful here, not to turn this into a victory lap, because the people who were right were mostly right by accident. But the pattern of what gets guessed correctly is flat out informative. Start with the giant straw hat. When that vault first appeared, with an enormous hat sitting in it under the holy city, the immediate reaction from a chunk of the fandom was that it belonged to a giant, and specifically to somebody from Elbaf. That was treated as a bit of a leap at the time. It was one object with no context in a scene that had 4 other enormous implications competing for attention. And now Nika is confirmed to have been the sun god, and Elbaf's mythology is confirmed to be built around him, and the hat has a plausible owner. Nobody who called that had evidence. They had a size and a vibe, and they were right, which tells you that reading the emotional logic of a scene is sometimes better than reading the details. Second, that Shanks was structurally strange. I mentioned this in the first tier, and I'll close the loop here rather than reopen it. The specific guesses were mostly wrong. The instinct that this man's background was hiding an institution rather than a secret was completely correct, and it was correct for a decade before there was anything to support it beyond the way he behaved around powerful people. Third, and this one is thoroughly satisfying, that Elbaf mattered. For years Elbaf was a place people talked about. Usopp wanted to go there. 2 giants in a prehistoric jungle mentioned it. It was, functionally, a running gag about a destination that never arrived. And a persistent group insisted it was going to be one of the most important locations in the series. Not a fun side trip, a pillar. The argument was mostly structural. Oda had spent too long mentioning it for it to be nothing, and the giants were the only major race left unexplored. They were right, and they were right on a scale nobody predicted. Elbaf turned into the arc, where the erased century started giving up its answers. Fourth, that the world government was the villain. This sounds obvious now. It was not obvious for a long time. In the early series, the Marines were an ambiguous institution with some decent people in it, and the government was distant scenery. The first arcs are about local tyrants, and there were readers, quite early, who argued that the real antagonist of the entire series was the political structure itself, that every villain was downstream of it, that the story was going to end with the institution rather than a person. They got laughed at for taking a pirate comic too seriously. They were right. Fifth, and this one's small, but I like it, that the cover stories were canon. There was a genuine dispute about this once, and it's hard to reconstruct now, because the answer seems so obvious in hindsight. Side comics in the corner of a page, no dialogue in some of them, easy to dismiss as a bonus, a doodle, something the editor asked for to fill a gap, and a group of people insisted, quite stubbornly, that they were load-bearing narrative and should be read as such. The argument was that Oda doesn't do decoration, that a man who plants a serpent story in 1999, for a payoff 25 years later, is not going to spend a decade drawing meaningless side panels. Everyone who skipped them ended up having the moon explained to them by someone who didn't. And there's a second half to this that's less often mentioned. The cover stories aren't just canon, they're structurally clever. Oda uses them for the material that would slow the main story down, where minor characters went. What happened to a country after the crew left? The long consequences of an arc that ended 300 chapters ago. That stuff is in earnest, important to the world feeling real, and it's actually fatal to pacing if you put it in the main narrative. So he moved it to the margins, which is, when you think about it, an elegant solution to a problem most long-running series never solve at all. Sixth, and this is the one I'd point to if somebody asked me for a single example of the fandom being right early, that Wano would matter. For a very long time, Wano was a rumour, mentioned by a samurai here, referenced as a closed country there. Nothing to work with. And people argued it was going to be one of the pivotal arcs of the series, on almost no basis beyond the fact that Oda kept bringing it up and then declining to elaborate. That instinct, he keeps mentioning it and won't explain, therefore it matters, turned out to be the single most reliable predictive tool anyone in this fandom has ever had. It's not clever, it requires no evidence, it just works. So the thing I actually want to draw out of all of this, look at what the correct theories have in common. Not one of them predicted a mechanism. Not one of them guessed a power, a rule, a system. Every single one of them was about significance. About which things in the story were going to matter. The hat matters, Shanks matters, Elbaf matters, the government matters, the corner of the page matters, and that's a completely different skill to prediction. It's closer to reading, honestly, noticing where the author's attention is and trusting that attention means something even when you have no idea what, which is, I think, the actual lesson of the whole Iceberg, if there is one. The fandom's best work isn't guessing the answers, it's identifying the questions before the story admits it's asking them. And there's something quite nice about that as an activity. Thousands of people, over decades, collectively pointing at bits of a story and saying that one, look at that one, something's happening there. Most of them wrong about what, nearly all of them right about where. Before we wrap up, I want to spend a bit of time on the little ones, the theories nobody builds videos around because they're too small to sustain an argument, and which I've always thought are the nicest part of the whole hobby. Take the going merry. There's a persistent idea that ships in this world can develop a spirit if they're loved long enough. The Klabautermann. It's borrowed from real maritime folklore, which is a nice touch, and the series treats it as something between superstition and fact. The shipwrights in Water 7 believe in it completely, and one of them was prepared to risk his life on the strength of hearing a voice he couldn't verify. The theory people run with is that this isn't superstition at all. It's a real mechanism in this world, and it connects to everything else about wills and inherited intent. That a ship carrying enough of somebody's care eventually carries a bit of them. I have no idea if Oda intends that to be systematic, or if it was a one-off piece of magic for a funeral. I quite like not knowing. Next, Vivaldi's dial, or rather, the dials generally, Sky Pier introduced shells that store things. Sound, wind, images, heat, impact. They're treated as local technology and then largely dropped, except they aren't. They turn up in Frankie's body, they turn up in various weapons, they're quietly everywhere. And there's a theory that dials are not natural at all, that they're manufactured, and that they're the same category of thing as the ancient technology found elsewhere, which would connect the Sky Islands back to the pre-collapse world rather than making them a curiosity. Small theory, big implications if it's right. Almost nobody talks about it. Here's another. The three-eyed people. There's a tribe with a third eye, and it's established that when the third eye opens completely, the person can read the ancient script. Not with study. Members of the three-eyed tribe can hear the voice of all things, but only when their third eye fully awakens, which means the language of the erased century is not entirely dead. It's been sitting dormant in a bloodline this whole time, waiting for someone to develop far enough to switch it on. That's a lovely idea on its own. The theory people build on top of it is that the three-eyed tribe are direct descendants of whoever carved the stones, and that the government's failure to eliminate them is the single biggest oversight in an otherwise flawless run of information control. Then there's the one about names. Almost every significant location in this series has a name that means something in a real language, usually Spanish, Portuguese, or Japanese wordplay. Laugh-Tale is the obvious one, now that we know what happened when Roger's crew got there. But it goes deeper. There are place names that describe what happens in them before you've read the arc. The theory is that the naming is systematic enough to be predictive, that you could, in principle, work out what an unvisited island is for by taking its name apart. I've never seen anyone actually pull that off, but I love that people try. One more, the animals. There's a running observation that this world's fauna is wrong in a specific direction. Everything is enormous, or hybrid, or shaped like something else. Lions with wings, ships crewed by animals in hats, sea kings the size of towns. And there's a modest theory that this is downstream of the same catastrophe as everything else. That the animals were changed by whatever happened, or that they're the survivors of an environment that no longer exists. Or, and this is entirely plausible, Oda just likes drawing a lion with wings. I'll be honest, I lean toward the lion explanation. Not everything is a clue. Sometimes a bloke wants to draw a lion with wings, and there is no deeper structure. And I think a healthy relationship with this series involves accepting that maybe 40% of the time. Right, and a truly tiny one to finish the tier, because it's been bothering me for years. The Barates fish. There's a running detail where the sea in this world is stratified in a way nobody explains fully. Certain fish only exist at certain depths. Certain regions have creatures that appear nowhere else. And the Grand Line's weather changes on an island-by-island basis with no atmospheric logic at all. The theory, such as it is, holds that all of this is downstream of the same event as everything else. That the reason the weather is broken in that specific region is that something was done to it, deliberately, and the Grand Line is not a natural current, but the scar of whatever happened. I've never seen this argued rigorously, and I doubt it ever will be. But it's the sort of small structural oddity that this series has a habit of picking up 200 chapters later and turning into a plot point, so I keep it in the back pocket. And one absolutely final small thing, which is more of an observation than a theory. The number of characters in this story who are currently pretending to be someone else, or hiding a name, or operating under an alias, is honestly absurd. It's dozens. A prince living under a false name for 2 decades. Half the Revolutionary Army. Most of the intelligence services. People whose surnames have been withheld from the reader for 70 volumes at a time. And somebody worked out, at some point, that this isn't just a plot habit, it's thematic. In a world where the government erased a century of history, everyone has learned to hide what they are, and the hiding has become the culture. You don't say your surname, you don't say what you know, you certainly don't say the letter. That's not a theory you can prove or disprove. It's just a way of reading the series that makes a lot of small things click together, and I think it's the most useful lens in this entire video. Here's a small one in the same family that I've always been fond of: the seagulls. Every marine ship, every marine building, every marine uniform has a seagull on it somewhere. It's the branding. And there's a very old, very silly and slightly compelling observation that the seagulls in this world behave oddly around marine business, that they turn up in scenes they have no reason to be in, positioned in ways that read as deliberate. The theory is that they're used, not magically, just as messengers or as a habit so old that nobody in story remembers starting it. There's no evidence. It's people looking at background birds. But it's exactly the sort of thing that this series has, on more than one occasion, turned out to be doing on purpose. And I'd be delighted if it were true. And one more, which is a bit more substantial. The Revolutionary Army's funding. The story has actually explained where their money comes from. This is an organisation running a global insurgency against a government that controls the world economy, and it has ships, weapons, safe houses, and an intelligence network that outperforms the official one. That is extraordinarily expensive, and every other major faction has a visible income. The pirates raid, the government taxes its member states, the underworld sells things, so people have gone looking. The two candidates that come up are a sympathetic member nation, quietly funneling resources, or the underworld, which would be a deliciously awkward arrangement for a movement built on liberating people. There's a third possibility that I find more interesting, which is that they're funded by the same people, they're liberating small contributions from a very large number of countries who don't advertise it. That would fit the series' politics rather neatly, and it would explain how an organisation this size stays invisible because there's no single source to cut off. Again, nothing confirms this. It's a gap in the world building that readers have filled in, which is what this entire video has been about, really. One last one, really, and then I'll stop adding to this pile. The lighthouses. There are a surprising number of lighthouses in this story, and a surprising number of them are attended by someone who has been there a very long time and knows more than they let on. It's a recurring figure, the keeper at the edge of things, who watched something happen once and never left. I don't think that's a theory, so much as a motif that somebody noticed and then started collecting. But collecting motifs, see, is how half the good theories in this video started, and I'd rather have people counting lighthouses than not. Which is probably a good note to stop on because I've been talking for a very long time, and the tears are getting shorter, so that's most of it. There's plenty I've left out, and there'll be more of it by the time you hear this, because the manga is moving quickly at the moment, and a fair few of these will have moved with it, which is, I think, the thing worth ending on. Most of what I've talked about tonight has a shelf life. Within a couple of years, a lot of it will be settled, some of it confirmed, more of it quietly retired, all of it eventually just part of the story rather than part of the argument about the story. And there's something specific about being here now, in the last stretch, when it's nearly finished and not finished, when everyone still gets to be right. That window doesn't stay open long, and once it closes, it doesn't reopen. So enjoy it while it's here. Or don't and go to sleep, which is what most of you are doing anyway. Thanks for listening. See you in the next one.